Hi, everybody. My name is Gabriella Grasso. I'm a journalist. And with QCode Mag, which is a web magazine that has been online for 8 years now, and covers stories from all over the world, and also has a print edition that comes out every 6 months. We are happy to introduce a series of interviews with writers from various countries. The idea with QCode Mag is that of opening up to different points of view, building bridges between cultures, and that is the reason why we decided to do the interviews in English, so that as many people as possible could follow, and also we could, chat directly with the author. So today, I'm very glad to have with me, connected from New York, Pitchaya Sudbanthad, a Thai writer who has recently been publishing his first novel, Bangkok Wakes to the Rain. It was published in English in the United States in 2019 and has been translated in Italian a couple of months ago. The title in Italian is Sotto la pioggia. I'll show it to you. Published by Fazi Editore and with a translation by Silvia Castoldi. I'll say something about the book, and then I'll start my questions with Pitchaya. It is a very fascinating and complex book. It's set in Bangkok, or better in Krung Thep, which is the traditional Thai name for the city. The city in itself is one of the main characters of the story. Of the novel, but it's not the only one. There is also a house, which we find in almost all chapters. It's a house from the beginning of the 20th century that is turned into a tower, modern tower. And we follow the story of this house and the inhabitants of the house and the tower. And then there are many other characters. The book is divided in chapters. Each chapter is dedicated to a story and certain characters. And then we find the same characters in other stories, 50 pages later. And the thing which I found amazing is that this happens not only with people, but even with details. Like at a certain point you read, you read and you find yourself in an apartment, the apartment of an old lady, and the person who is talking about the house, she comments on an old green chair. And the reader reads and says, okay, I've seen this chair before. And then, the reader goes back and finds the same chair in another house 50 years before. So you realize it is the same chair and the owner is the same. So you sort of put the bits and pieces together. So it's really fascinating. And I don't think it was easy to build this novel this way, especially being a first novel. So definitely my first question is about how did you build this novel? What was the process? While I was reading it, I imagined you had like a wall full of little, pieces of yellow paper, like with all the names and, arrows going from one name to the other, because you must have had a plan to put everything together. How did it work?
Well, it was a very slow plan, and it didn't come together all at once. I think that I was trying to search for a book, and I was trying to find different ways to enter the book. And the first part that came to me was the story of the woman in Japan. She's a Thai woman who runs a restaurant in Yokohama, and all of a sudden she has no way to get the right ingredients to produce the food that she makes. So, and this actually comes from my childhood of having grown up in Saudi Arabia and in America, and foods from Thailand, from my country where I'm from, is you can get things at the store, but they were never quite write.
Mm-hmm.
So the most precious things were things that came in friends or relative suitcases. And that was how that grew into this, the story of this woman in a place and at a time in which Thai food is not as popular as it is now. Now everyone knows what pad Thai or pad Kapau is, but back then, Thai was exotic. Um, and that was the story that came first. And as I began writing, I didn't quite make those instant connections. I just wrote a new story. And that just turned out to be the story of Sammy, and the house that he's leaving behind. And something clicked, and it connected, like who was this woman's sister working for, who owns this building. And then I just began writing this story that's set in the 19th century, in which there's a missionary who is in Siam, and is on a medical mission. Is confronting several things about himself as he finds himself in a strange land. And all of a sudden, things just kind of began to organically connect in ways that I could not have predetermined. Like a lot of people think that, oh, you must have like plotted everything out, but it was lots of attempts to enter into what I thought was going to be like a book about one main subject, but it just turned out that gradually things just composited into something that's larger than I thought it was going to be, and my vision for the novel also expanded as well, so that eventually, through the course of writing and editing, and trying to see what works, I found a shape that I could play with for the novel, and it is a novel that spreads over the lifetime of a city. And so there's a lot of breadth, and it was just a question of like, how do I walk people through in ways that made sense to me, that doesn't tell the entire picture of a place, but gives glimpses enough that people can make their own connections. So that was how.
How long did it take to write it?
It took probably 5 years to get to a point where I had something of a draft. And I wasn't even quite sure then that I had something that was going to be a novel. It was just like a jumble of pages, and it seemed like it was ending. So at that point was a point in which I was beginning to have interest in it. So I'm like, I guess I should just let other people see and decide. And luckily, they thought it was something that they could work with.
When was the last time you were actually living in Bangkok?
Oh, I just got back from Bangkok, actually. I came back a few weeks ago, and I had been there for about 3 months.
Okay.
So it was a very strange Bangkok in these times of COVID, and I didn't quite go out and about as much as I usually do. As with most of my time in Bangkok, it's usually with family. Because
your parents live there?
Yeah, my parents are all there. My family's all there. So I've been heading back there ever since I was a kid, after having left when I was about 10 years old. And then making my way back every year. And right now, trying to spend as much time as possible with my relatives.
Okay. Well, this thing that you left when you were a kid brings me to Sammy, which is one of the characters I was going to ask you later, but might as well do it now. As I said before, there are many characters, but the two that I was mostly interested by, I don't know why, maybe because they're so different from one another, are Sami and Ne. Sami is born in Thailand, but then when he's a kid, he's taken to London with his family. He moves to London with his family, and somehow he doesn't really never go back. I mean, he goes back, but he never goes back as deciding definitely to go back home. And the idea that we get reading the book is that Sami is restless and is sort of running away from his country, his past, his family, his own identity. On the other hand, we have Ne, and they meet at one certain point, they interact. And Ne, on the contrary, is very, very related, strongly related to her country. She is involved in the protests in 73 and 76. She is personally strongly affected by what happens in those years. And to the point that at one point of the story, when she discovers that her sister, the one you were referring to, the one who is living in Japan, when she finds out something about her, let's say, I don't want to spoil anything, but let's say she finds out a relation between her sister and one of the dictators, let's say, the colonel. In Italian it's translated colonnello. I don't know how it's in English, but one of the responsible for killing many students during those protests. Ne decides not to speak to her sister for 10 years. So she's very, very committed to certain values and to the history of her country. So these two characters are very different. Nevertheless, they meet and then they part. So I would really would like you to say more about them. How did you come up with them? What, I don't know if Sami has something to do with you, as you just said that you left when you were young.
That's asked quite a bit, and fortunately, Sami is a composite of some of my own experiences and experiences of many other people, and some are just things I made up. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like they're the characters that are different, as you were talking about before, about one is kind of pegged to a place and the other is almost always in a constant act of escaping. Mm-hmm. And I thought that they kind of form a dyad of sorts, and you have these different directions and yet they meet. And there's something that I thought was interesting about having that happen. And at the same time, they're both also characters who are clinging to the past, but in different ways, even if they are in different directions of their lives. I think Sami is clinging on to the fantasy of past happiness, mm-hmm. and Ne is clinging to a past tragedy, but these things sends them in different directions. Him to many places around the world, and her to the place where she can't entirely escape from, unlike her sister. Yeah. So I thought that there was a tension in there that was it worked for the novel to form a kind of a vertebrate, right? Almost like a skeletal string that I think touches on beyond their own storylines. Mm-hmm. So that was my thought of it. And they're very interesting characters. Sami comes from some of my own experience of being in a kind of in-between, being born somewhere but also distant, but then you return and you're close again. And I speak and read Thai, so when I'm back there, I just slide. Excuse me?
Did you say you speak in?
Oh, I speak and read Thai.
Ah, okay.
So when I'm back, I just slide back into, the everyday existence of my family. And it just seems like I've never left. But at the same time, I'm also able to see Bangkok and Thailand from a kind of remove. So there's this kind of in-betweenness that I think probably informs some of my characterization of Sammy. And they think that Ni is someone, who I imagine from having read accounts of the tragic events of the 1970s in Bangkok. And, there was a story of, there were real life nursing students who leapt into the water, and, I don't think they made it. And
Because that's what happens to her.
that's what happens. Well, she was able to escape.
She escaped in the water.
I don't think that the people who leapt into the water that day made it. So that grew out of, she grew out of that, grew out of me having, the first time I heard about the 1970s protests was from my grandmother, when I was less than 10 years old. And just hearing that, it just stuck with me. And, for her, she had asked her own children not to go, and they complied. And I thought how vastly different things might have been had they gone and had something happen to my aunt and uncle. Like I would have grown up in a very different family and maybe been a different person. So there are these things that I think help to inform the characters, and there are the characters that I think help to inform a good portion of the book and beyond their own parts.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was very interesting, the part where you talk about the events of the 76, because it is true that in Europe, I think also in the United States, I'm not sure, but in Europe, we have this idea that Thailand is a place where you go and there are beautiful beaches and beautiful, nice food, but we never think, or we never get ourselves to, involved in what's beyond that. So I think that it was very interesting, the fact that you pointed out somehow how the politics of the country affects and affected real people's lives. Yep. So I don't want to, to turn this conversation in a history lesson, but would you say just a few words about what happened in 76?
Oh, there were student protests against authoritarian governments that turned out very deadly. I think it vastly affected Thai politics for the next decades. And a lot of it came from, right-wing influences at that time that's continuing today. And when you look at the news on Thailand today, you still see echoes from that period. And I think you're right in the sense that Thai food is now so popular. Muay Thai is practiced in so many gyms across the world, and people go to visit Bangkok, and this is something I realized when Thailand became a more popular tourist destination, and more of my friends began visiting the country, and they speak of a Bangkok and Thailand that I'm like, what country are you talking about? Because the Bangkok that they experience is a floating fantasy of a vacation experience, and it's far different from the experience and stories and culture of everyday people in Bangkok and Thailand. So I think I was hoping that maybe some of that would show through in my own work.
It does, definitely. It does. I've never been to Thailand, but I can say that I can tell you that what comes out from the book, it's like a 360-degree vision of the place. Maybe not of the entire country, but of the city of Bangkok, absolutely. And actually, you really feel, the reader really sort of feels like that can feel the humidity in the air, can feel the smell of food in the streets. It's really powerful the way you describe the city. And there is also, it's very interesting that you start from, I think Phineas Stevens, the doctor, is his stories is set in the 19th century, I think. And then you go to the far future where Bangkok or Krung Thep, it's a totally different place, even a bit scary. So first of all, how do you see the city now? How would you describe the city now? And then my other question is about, without spoiling too much, but in this far future that you talk about, there are many floods, and the city is sort of transformed in a sort of Venice, Asian Venice, where, you know, where once there were skyscrapers, there is water. And I was wondering if, you know, this is also a way to express concern for, you know, climate change and what's happening in the world.
Yeah, Thailand and Bangkok right now are in, you know, it's a city that if you know a little bit about Bangkok, you can sense that it's a city that's always changing, and it's this constant process of birth and rebirth and sort of self-creation and self-destruction that it almost feels as if Bangkok is also sort of always in an in-between. It has its own history, but there's also so many influences from the West and other Asian powers, you know, both politically and culturally. And you go to Bangkok now, and you can sense that there's the old and the new. You see temples and, you know, saffron robed monks walking the street, and people giving alms, at the same time that you're that, you know, everyday people are enjoying technologies that's on the verge of magical. You know, I go back, and, you know, the things that people can do on their phones there are just like beyond what I'm used to in America even.
Really?
Yeah, it's, and, you know, like the clean sky trains and subways, and at the same time there's also you know, like lots of pollution and things that have been brought to the city because of all this progress. So the city is always in this lurch towards the future, but there's side effects of that lurch, and pollution is one of them, you know, and definitely because it's one of those cities that was a part of the you know, it was never officially a colony, but it was definitely influenced by colonial politics of the time. So where the city is located used to be a marshland. And now it's this vibrant city that's built on top of this natural lowland that floods all the time. And everyone who has known Bangkok well is also familiar with water and rain, because that's just a fact of the city. And when I began to project the city into the future, as someone who was in an environmental science and policy major in college, and knowing about the coming climate crisis and things that were possibilities back then, there was always this anxiety that I had about this place where I'm from, where my family lives, that I care so much about. And it's one of the many cities, as with, you know, Shanghai, Venice, New York, many you know, like Mumbai, cities around the world that will be greatly affected by the likelihood of vast climate changes that's caused by human activity for the sake of economic growth that's reckless. So seeing all this happen, I couldn't help but apply my imagination to how characters in Gungteb would survive, um, and also kind of hold on to who they are, hold on to their culture and their past, and deal with more uncertainties of what the future might bring. So that was my imagination combined with my general anxiety,
Okay.
of the climate crisis.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we're running out of time, which is a pity because there are so many. The books is so complex, and there are so many things that I really would stay here much longer to talk about
Oh,
it. But okay. So before saying goodbye, I would like to ask you if you want to read us the beginning of the book, like the first, 10, 15 lines.
yep. Let me find my glasses. Always she arrives near evening. The last few children in blue and white uniforms have finished their after-school work and are plodding along in small gangs or like her, alone. They don't take notice of her. They have screens in their hands, shoves and teasing to repay, snacks bagged in newsprint to grease up their fingers. In their trail, sparrows tussle over falling fried crumbs and biscuit sticks trampled to powder by little shoes. A pearl-eyed lottery seller, sensing passers-by from footsteps and the clap of flip-flops, calls out over an open case of clothespin tickets to whoever craves luck. Her nose picks up the ashen smell always in the air. Somewhere a garbage heap incinerates underneath a highway overpass. In temples, incense sticks release sweet smoke to the holy and the dead. Flames curl blue in the open gas grills of shophouse and food stalls. She is a child or a few thousand years old. Would it ever matter? The city will stay this way for her. When she was a uniformed primary schooler herself, walking home along these fairy streets, she liked to make believe she was a bewildered traveler in a foreign city, drawn forward by alluring strangeness. She couldn't have known then that there would be years ahead when she didn't have to pretend, and years still further ahead when pretending was all she could do.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So here, again, I'll show you the cover, Sotto la pioggia, Pitchaya Sudbanthad. I hate when I don't get names right. Thanks for being with us. I hope people who followed enjoy it and will read your book, your really beautiful book. And goodbye.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. Goodbye.
Bye.